at Capital One, we've built a process that actually automates the checks for our developers. So they don't have to think about, oh, am I following the right policy? Am I really, making sure that I'm not leaking any secrets, or I'm making sure that, hey, I have, I've abided by the license obligations that are in place, right? So there are various different checks within the pipeline that allows you to freely contribute and not think about, oh, did I meet all these checklists, right? So that allows a better experience for our developers. So it's important that it's not just about the culture, but creating those policies, the rules, the automation that is needed for our developers to do the right thing, because they always want to do the right thing. I don't think anybody wants to do a right thing. Everybody wants to contribute. Everybody wants to follow the rules. But if you make it easy for them, open sourcing becomes easy. So these are a few foundations that we have our presence. Apache, we have someone here who's a member of Apache from Capital One, and we're big on participating CD Foundations, Linux, FinOS, Python, Cloud Native, and the 3 new ones that we joined this year was OpenSSF, OpenJS, and OSI. This shows our commitment to strengthening our software supply chain. There are amazing projects within OpenSSF, like the scorecard. We're very much interested in that project, and we're looking to contribute back. OpenJS, we use a ton of projects that are managed on this foundation, and we're looking to giving back as well, and we've been contributing. So OSI has a clearly defined, if you're looking for a project that has license that are defined in a clearly way, so that's exactly the name of the project. Go check it out. Definitely has really good features that that we found useful. So with that, I will hand it off to Jeremy and Sri to talk about RubyCon and Data Profiler. These are 2 open source featured projects of Capital One, and they will hear a story from the customer standpoint on how they are able to increase collaboration and maintain this project.
Thank you, Nureen, for the introduction. My name is Ranganathan. I work with Capital One's machine learning experience team. So the first and the foremost thing, before I start talking about RubyCon ML, I would definitely want to emphasize on a few points that Nureen has already made. So in our naive minds, when we actually started developing RubyCon ML, we went to open source office saying, hey, we want to open source. So the first question was, why? Why do you want to do it? There are so many things out there that are already open source which do a similar job. So why do we want to open source? So that brought us to actually thinking, yes, why do we want to open source? This is not the first question that we will get, nor will be the last. So we said, okay, fine, we have explored some similar tools that are out in the market, but most of these tools are actually tying us to a specific platform, to a specific infrastructure, and we didn't want that, right? So she's like, yes, that's a great start, but what have you thought of? Have you thought of who's going to maintain it? How are you going to protect the company? How are you going to ensure that there is no IP in your thing? And if there are any vulnerabilities, how are you going to address? So many different questions that we didn't think of. And that's when we actually started understanding more about these processes that are in place to help us as people who actually contribute to this project, and as a company to protect us to using something out there, right? Not exposing our secrets to the public world, especially coming from a financial industry. We are very protective of our IP, and everything we do have to be explained to zillion regulators, saying that we are doing the right thing, we are not doing anything, we are protecting our data, we are not exposing. So what happens is we understood this process. We were actually told how to take care of our vulnerabilities, how to push our commits to external Git repos so that every process that's in place ensures that there is nothing confidential or proprietary that is getting leaked out to the industry, right? So of all these things, it was definitely a lot of learning processes, and of course, when there are a zillion processes in place, it does tend to lead a bit to a frustration. But when she took time to explain why it's being done, how it's being done, that's when we really appreciated how much thought process goes into establishing this process and put them in place. So here to talk about one of the projects that we have actually open sourced last year. It's called Rubicon ML. Again, the same question I'm sure will be lurking in some of your brains, saying oh, there is ML flow out there. There is weights and biases. Why do you have to do Rubicon? I'll start talking about Rubicon and explain our reasoning behind it. So this is, we have 164 commits so far. We have 13 contributors, 20 forks, and 81 stars, and definitely trying to get more attention to it. But what does Rubicon do? As I just said, we are in the machine learning experience team, so we actually work with people who develop models day in, day out. And for those of you who have been exposed to model development, it's a very iterative process. You start looking into your data, you identify your parameters, you identify what sort of a modeling technique you're going to use, what exactly is your output, and then you formulate a plan. Hey, this is how my model is going to look. But 6 months down the lane, you'll say, hey, this is not actually yielding the score that I want to, right? So what happens? You go back to your data and start looking at different set of parameters. You might change your modeling techniques. But throughout this particular process, there are hundreds of experiments that you will be running. You need somebody to log the data, to very strictly maintain that particular log, saying that, hey, I have used this data, I have used these parameters, and this yielded this particular score to me, right? Because as I said, we are in a fintech industry. Everything that we do has to be run through our regulators. We have to explain every single step to make sure that there's no bias involved. We are being extremely fair to our customers, right? If I don't have a tool that basically tracks everything that I do and also tie that particular output to a specific state of my code. Okay, I'm sorry. I thought I heard some noise and I was okay. So if there is no way we tie to a specific state of the code, there is no way we can go explain it to our regulators. So what we have done is we have developed this particular tool. So at the beginning of the model development, you actually create a model object using Rubicon. You tell where is your data. The data is defined by you. We have explored many tools and we said we are not going to tie our users to use a specific data set, whether you want to let it remain on your local, whether you want to use AWS service, whether you want to use Azure, or you want to use a database. We don't restrict you. We are not prescriptive of where the data has to live. And at the same time, we also let you decide as to what your infrastructure is going to be, right? You want to run it on a cloud-based EC2 instance, or you want to run it local. That's totally up to you. So all that freedom is basically with the user. You decide what you want to do. What Rubicon does is it basically keeps track of your data. Where is it? Your parameters. What is the input to your model? It tracks your output. And at the end of it, it basically provides you with some visualizations to see how the data is trending, what are the insights that you want to gather from this particular data. As we said, yes, there are similar tools out in the market, but we didn't want that it is restricted to a platform, or it is restricted to a specific language, or prescriptive of where your data should live and what infrastructure to use. So that's pretty much the Rubicon ML. So we have actually revamped our architecture after hearing so many things from Nureen's team. We actually revamped our architecture to take off any dependencies, whether it's defining where the data is going to be, what infrastructure is going to be. All those things have been stripped out, and it's basically a solution that will help to standardize the model development. What does it do? It basically stores, organizes, and retrieves the model input and output. And of course, all this is depending upon another open source library called FSspec. So any file system that is supported by FSspec will be automatically supported by Rubicon as well. Apart from it, it will let you share your experiments. Like, you have done experiments, you are finally ready to say, hey, this is what is my model going to look. These are the inputs, these are the outputs and stuff. And when you're working with a model, that you understand that it's never one person, right? There's a team, there are a group of people, there are regulators who are looking into it. So you share these experiments. When I'm sharing the experiments, I'm not talking about copy pasting these files into 100 different emails, right? So we use a library called Intake, which basically lets you share the data in a very secure and a safe manner, depending upon what rights and privileges you have. And last but not least is the visualizing and the comparing of the experiments. You have done experiments. You have used one set of parameters for one experiment, different set of parameters for different experiments. How are these models scoring, right? Like, to compare this, we have widgets that people can simply pick up depending upon what they want to see, and all these widgets are powered by Dash and Plotly, which are actually open source tools as well. So that's Rubicon, but again, the whole process, so many things that we haven't thought of, as Nureen mentioned, have been set in place to make sure that everything is done in the right manner. Yes, bringing something, open sourcing it is, we understand, bringing great minds together to contribute. And not last but not the least is, it's not just like, putting it out to the public out there to say, come use this, tell us what is lagging, and contribute. But it also, to some extent, helps us get more contributions from within Capital One. It's not just external, it's within as well, right? So with that, I will give it to Jeremy to talk more about another project.
Thank you. My name is Jeremy Goodsitt, and I am part of an applied research team within Capital One. One of the open source repos that I've worked on, and one of the main focuses I've had, is called the Data Profiler. But I want to touch on a point that was just made, is that being able to open source is actually an opportunity for you to get more contributions from inside of your company as well. We've actually found that happen several times, where sometimes the communication within the company doesn't get to the people that always want to use the product. Sometimes it has to go outside, talked about externally before it comes back in, before you get contributors internally as well. But I kind of want to look at this from the perspective of a little deeper dive from our contributors of why it's so important for this process to be automated. And also from the perspective of this project. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the project as well as what it's meant to us to be able to open source it. In terms of open sourcing and data, data sharing enables better ML and data-related infrastructure. So data itself is another component that we can look at open sourcing ourselves. It's not just the code, but being able to share data and allow others to see our data, or to be able to create synthetic data potentially, allows people to build better models. So if I have data that I can desensitize or take away the proprietary information, but you're still able to get the information out of that data, that means we together, even though I'm from within a company, we can build things better together. And so enabling that is really important. And so I'm going to talk about essentially the data profiler. But before I get into that as well, I want to talk about what is data profiling. And it's basically being able to point at a data source and be able to understand what's inside that data. So collecting statistics or informative summaries about that data. Oh, you're good. No worries, appreciated. So the data profiler, I'll tell you a little bit about the project. It's basically, like I said, a one-stop shop to get information about your data sets. And so it automatically reads your data set depending on the type of file. It profiles it, and it gives you a report out in 3 easy commands. And there's more complicated features to it. You can update and merge it. So if you have data that's coming in via stream or in batches, or you want to parallelize your your study or the reports of that data set, you can break it out into components and do basically a map reduce function to be able to combine those profiles back together. And obviously, the importance of open sourcing, being able to share data, you don't always need to share the exact data. You could share the profile. So you need to be able to save and load that profile or understand the differences between profiles. And so we do that right now for structured, unstructured, and graph profiles. So that's a little bit about the data profiler itself. But again, being able to share that information and being able to open source that, and again, being able to automate this process of contributing allows us to begin to work with others. So for instance, one of the main use cases is being able to understand the data that's going into your models and making sure the data that's coming in later for inference, like if you're training a model with a certain data set, you want to make sure that the data that gets to that model later is not outside the bounds of what that model expects, because that's when you have failures, or that's when you need to trigger refit of that model, right? Or you want to make sure that as an engineer, the data that's coming into my API is what I expected to, so I need to validate that schema. And so again, one of the great importance about being able to open source is now I can work with other open source projects, right? I'm able to go directly with another, this Great Expectations is another open source repository that I've had the fortunate ability to be able to work with, which has been really awesome. They've been really helpful. But now we can create automated data quality checks, and that's something that we're building right now. We've been able to integrate the data profiler into another open source repo. And we've continued that collaboration, which means we can spread the word about both our projects together. And so, like I said, one of the up-and-coming features, Great Expectations just released data assistance, which has been really cool. So automated data quality checks, and when we've been able to take the data profiler, and we're working on this right now to be able to integrate that directly into that repo. So now you can take a profile at a later time and be able to automate this process of checks. Similarly, you can use that sort of technology for anomaly and drift detection. One of their community events that they did, they had set up like some sensors and monitors with their Great Expectations repository to do that on demand. And one of the abilities that we could then do and that we thought of, and then we're like, well, what if we took a profile of that data set, insert that into the Great Expectation, build that automated data quality check so that as data changes potentially, or as it drifts, we're able to adapt to that ability. Synthetic data generation, I kind of alluded to that a little bit earlier. Being able to share data. If we're able to take a profile of the data, we should be able to understand what's in it, which means, again, being able to share data is really important for us to be able to work together. Synthetic data is one of those opportunities to do that. So we can work together to build profiles of our data set and share that synthetically, essentially. And again, another opportunity that came from the synthetic data generation and the data profiler itself was another group had reached out, and we created a joint blog post discussing the ability to generate data, and we were using the data profiler to be able to evaluate whether or not the synthetic data being generated was well representative of the original data set. But again, this opportunity doesn't come along if I'm not able to work outside of the company. I'm not able to go outside and talk to these other people. And so again, automating this process has been really important for us because not only has it made it so simple for us to be able to contribute to other repositories that exist external to the company, but it also, like I said, when I talk to other people within the company, because sometimes, like I said, the customers first learn about it from external, I can talk to them and say, hey, it's so easy to contribute. It's been so easy for me to contribute to the open source. Why don't you also contribute to my project as well? So that's allowing for not just open source contributions, but even open source in the sense of inner sourcing within your company as well, making that process really simple. And again, there's almost like a little bit of a bravado about like being able to share, you know, I did this work. I can now showcase the work that I did. And that is another reason that like every time I talk to someone else within the company about like they have maybe a feature request, I can be like, why don't you contribute that as well to the open source? Now you can show the work that you're doing externally, even though it's for Capital One. And then a small, not a very small component, but another component that I didn't really talk about previously about the data profiler is it also does data labeling, so it's able to identify types of data. Right now, we have an open sourced CNN model, deep learning model that basically characterizes the data and identifies what type of data type it might be. For instance, it can identify social security numbers, people's names, things like that, to a certain accuracy. We actually have a paper that we were able to direct back to the data profiler that comes, or that model that we built for that paper, we were able to put in the open source and be able to share that with the rest of the community, that other people can now utilize that. But again, whether it's the data profiler or data labeling, we want to be able to share this with the rest of the community, and also be able to build this library such that other people can contribute back to it too. So even in building this data labeling, we worked on it in such a way where people can bring their own models. And so not just sharing profiles, but you have the opportunity to share models as well that someone else could then utilize for their own data set. So just this great opportunity of automating, like I said, being able to contribute to the open source has allowed us to interact more with the rest of the community. It's been able to bring more contributions from internal that we wouldn't have otherwise had. And it's just been an extremely fun experience that I've been really thankful, and it's definitely one of the major reasons I've worked for Capital One, is this opportunity in general. Yeah, so if you want to learn more about our tech, you can check out Capital One Tech to find more about open source enterprise software solutions, ideas, and different stories. We do talk about a lot of what we do on our Capital One blog, so you're welcome to check us out there. We have more information directly about like the different projects, like the data profiler or Rubicon ML, or even other things that you might be interested in terms of what Capital One is up to. And at Capital One, we celebrate and honor differences that makes us all unique inside and outside of work. So help create us a more equitable future for all. Join us, visit Capital One Careers and view our open roles, and follow us on Twitter at Capital One Tech. Thank you.